That's not a touchscreen. That's a touchscreen. Chris here, back again, and today we will be checking out the BTT 7-inch TFT touchscreen you can use on your 3D printer. And let's just get this out of the way right now. Who would ever need a 7-inch touchscreen on their machine? Who would need it? Probably no one. But don't let that detract from its coolness factor. And the fact that BTT has added a few more features to the firmware that runs on this screen, I think a screen this size would probably make a few of those easier to use. So we're definitely going to check that out. Plus, this gives us an excuse to go back through the steps of adding a screen like this to your printer. No matter what size it is, it's going to be somewhat similar. And we can check out a couple of different boards and the Marlin config that it takes to get it up and working. So let's go ahead and check out the hardware first and see what we're dealing with before we do the install. Here's a look at the front of the screen itself, and before we get started, let's start with some slow motion peeling. Now that that's out of the way, we do have our 7-inch touchscreen here in front. You do have an encoder wheel that you can use in Marlin mode. We'll take a look at that, a reset button, and a speaker. Then on the back, you have a lot of the different connectors that you've started to see on these touchscreens, the MKS ones and the BTT ones. You have all three of the EXP connections, so you can use the boards that utilize the Creality screens that do just one plug, or you can use the ones that utilize the full graphics riprap screen. You have your RS-232 serial connection. That's the one that's actually going to connect the touchscreen to your board. A couple of different UART connectors. You have a filament detect connection. You have full-size SD card. You have USB, where you can pull G-code files from. These do run an STM32 processor. You have a Wi-Fi port. You can add an ESP module. You have an SWD port down here that you can use for some diagnostics. You have a NeoPixel port. You can put some lights on it. And you have a PS on. You can use the screen to turn your printer off after a print, or turn it on before it starts printing. So lots of different options here. You can do a lot of different things on this screen. But remember, a lot of things that this screen controls can only affect the print if it's being printed from one of these two devices, SD or USB, not the card on the printer. And let's talk about this stand-up case for just a second. Our friend Patrick Cruse said he was going to be creating one for the 7-inch screen, so I definitely wanted to check it out, and he did a really nice job. I did make a few alterations. It has the front bezel, the stand, and then this reset switch protector right here. Everything worked good except for you couldn't see the LED light that actually makes your knob glow, so I added a little bit of space in here and on the protector just to let that through. I'll leave the update and the original in the description below. But the screen just screws into the back of this bezel. It fits nice and snug, and then I just use M3 by 6mm screws to screw it right into the plastic. This is Green Gates PETG, by the way. I just used 4 M3 by 6mm screws to install it. And as for the stand for this case, this area right here allows for the plugs on the back of the board, so you have room to snake the cables down and feed them through this hole. Now, I did try to use it like this, and it is possible, but you'd probably have to cut some more holes or edit this case to be able to put the wires directly out the back. But it could work. Also, on the bottom of this, in its intended place, it has some spots where you can put some rubber feet, maybe print some out of TPU. You can see most of the plugs that you're going to use are up here, and that's what this valley here is for. This does just snap fit on here after you've run your wires through that bottom hole. I'm not going to put it on quite yet because I want to show you what the connections are going to go to on the different boards that we're going to show. So we'll snap it on here in a bit. So first up, let's start with our SKR mini board. Whether it's a version 1, 1, 2, or 2.0, it's going to be pretty much the same when you're hooking up a TFT screen like these. You will have a set of 5 pins like these right here, labeled TFT. You have 5 volt on this pin right here, and the other side is reset. On these cables, one of the wires is split off. That's for the reset, this pin right here. So the cable that comes with your screen will install just like this. And again, that loose pin goes on the last pin for reset. Right there. Just to give you a look, there's the badging. And then on the mini board, it's made to be used with Creality printers. So you have this one LCD plug right here. They call it EXP3. So the ribbon cable that came with your Big Tree Tech screen or your printer goes just right here. And then that will connect to the EXP3 connector on the back of the screen. This is so you can use Marlin mode. And this will be enabled on the stock firmware that comes with your Big Tree Tech board. I'll also show you how to enable that to make sure it works in Marlin by hand. And as far as the back of the screen goes for that style of board that Creality has with that one LCD plug, that's going to go in EXP3. So for your serial connection, those black wires will go in RS232, just like that. That's for the touch mode. And then to use that EXP3, it's all the way down here. 1, 2, and 3. And your ribbon cable goes on just like that. Now for something like the SKR13, 14, 14 Turbo, your TFT pins are going to be right here. Reset is this pin right here. Remember, that's the one that isn't included in the DuPont connector, the single one. And 5 volt is right here. Your connector will install just like this. And then the single one goes on that reset pin. Right there. Again, here's a look at the badging. And then on these boards, they're set up like a lot of the other old school boards. You have EXP1, EXP2. 1 here, 2 here. Those are compatible with things like the 2004 screen that you're used to seeing and the full graphics screen. So if you're configured to use a setup like this, that screen does come with 2 ribbon cables. So just plug one in here and one in there. And then they'll plug into the screen in the same ports, 1 and 2. And for the back of the screen for something like your SKR13, 14, and ramps, you're going to use 1 and 2 EXP connections, just like you would on a full graphics or a 2004 display. You'll still use your RS232 for your serial. So again, your black cable goes on just like this, and then just match up your EXP1 on the board to EXP1 on the screen, and same for EXP2. And on something like ramps, you'll use this AUX1 plug to use that screen. You'll have 5 volt ground, transmit, and receive. And you can just leave that reset pin off. You just won't be able to use your button to reset the printer. You could go into the firmware and assign that to another pin if you'd like. And once you've decided what cables you need to support your features to use this case, you'll just route all your wires down. We are going to install it on the mini board, so this is all we need. And then your stand, your cables will run through this bottom hole, like so, and then it'll snap right on this stand. Just like that. It's a really nice fit. And then on the front side, we can put our reset switch protector on. That does really come in handy, by the way. And then we can finish it off by installing our knob. So I'm cabled up to my mini board. I am using the Mini E3 version 2 right now on my Ender 3. And I have my EXP3 cable plugged in so I can use Marlin mode. This is touchscreen mode. You can flip to Marlin mode by holding the button for 3 seconds. Then it will let you choose via the touchscreen which mode you'd like to go in. If you want to go into Marlin mode, just tap it. Then we have the usual Marlin display in all of its giant glory. Now let's jump back to touchscreen mode just for a second, and we're going to take a look at the firmware version. So let's go to Menu, we'll go into Settings, and let's take a look at Info. Our current firmware version is 3.0.26.2. And that's a pretty current version, but I mention this because next we need to talk about updating the firmware on these screens and enabling different features. So if we take a look at the Big Tree Tech GitHub, you can see some of these dates. Some of these were updated even 12 hours ago, so they are continuously making updates as well as others because this is open source firmware. So we're just going to grab all the firmware, go up to Code, and hit Download Zip. I've already done this, but we'll head to Downloads. You will get this Big Tree Tech master zip file, and when you right-click Extract All, we can head into the folder. Now, to update with their firmware, all you really need to do is grab the bin file they provide for you and the files for all the icons that go with it. Some of these themes have actually been merged, but the one for the 7-inch, you only get the unified version. The one that we see already on the screen, but this will be in here in this file. So you will need your correct bin file, the one for the 7 right here, and you will also have to copy this set of icon files to get it to update correctly. So you would copy this bin file and this folder to your SD card, load it onto your screen, reboot your screen, and then it'll be updated. And that process is all fine and good for just updating your screen, but we want to customize it as well. So if we open up Visual Studio Code, just like in Marlin, we can use Platform I/O to edit our firmware and then create a bin file that we can then upload. So we're just going to hit Add Folder. We'll go to our downloads. And when you download something from GitHub, it usually puts a folder inside a folder. So we're going to go inside the parent folder, and we want to add the Big Tree Tech folder that contains the firmware. So this one right here. It'll be the one that has the .github entry in it. So the one above it, this one. So I'll go ahead and hit Add. And if you expand it, you'll know you have done it correctly because you will have a Platform I/O folder, this PIO folder right here. And you'll have your Platform I/O icon, and you'll have build environments available. We're going to build for the 7 version 3. But let's take a look at the configuration first. Back to the Explorer, and we'll expand it TFT, User, and we'll take a look at configuration.h, just like Marlin. So in here, you can change up a whole lot of different attributes for these screens. You can change the default mode. You can change the knob LED. LED is off by default. That sounds like a pretty cool feature. I'm going to make mine green, so let's change it to 5. You can change up the LCD brightness, the idle timer when it goes off. You can change the Marlin mode background color. By default, it is set to black. I'm going to keep mine there, but if you don't want that, you can change that up. And then you can change the font color. I'm going to change mine to green, because I like that old green screen feel. You can change the banner text that gets displayed on the top. Let's just change it to Marlin is awesome. You can turn that text off altogether if you'd like. You can change if it is in full screen mode. We definitely want ours in full screen. Some of the other size screens don't handle it that well, but we'll make ours full, so we'll change that to 1. You can change the baud rate. This is important. You need to match the baud rate that's set in your Marlin config. This Ender 3 by default is set to 115200, so that's what my screen is set at. You can change this on the touch screen as well. You don't have to change it in the firmware. Just be aware that they have to match each other. Most of the time, you're only going to see 115200 and 250,000. So try either one of those. You can show the Big Tree Tech boot screen or not. That's fine with me. We'll just leave it. You can change the buzzer frequency, some different notification options. The touchscreen mode color options are completely customizable. Your hot end preheat temperatures as well as your bed. How many hot ends you have, how many fans you have. You can change up the size of the machine, nozzle park features, because you can use the filament runout sensor right on the screen. What commands that runs, it's going to run M600 by default. It even has options where you can use unified bed leveling right on the screen. Changes for your offset, your EEPROM. There's a ton of new stuff in here that wasn't in here the last time we looked at a touchscreen. Baby stepping values, your PS on pins, how they're controlled. And then you can even get into custom labels and G-codes. You can just keep defining them and change up whatever commands you would like to run. But most of the ones that I use are already in here. But if you want to change it, you definitely can. You even have the option to add some start G-code when you're using the screen, end G-code, and cancel G-code. This way, if when you cancel from the screen, it'll move the head to one side or the other, wherever you'd like it. It will home it. There's just a ton of different things you can do in here now. But we didn't change up much, but let's go ahead and compile so I can show you how that's going to work. So once you're done with your configuration.h, come over here to your platform I/O icon, find the screen you have. Again, TFT70 version 3. We're just going to hit build. It's going to download all the libraries it needs to build it. The build was successful. I'm going to grab an SD card, mount it on my PC. This just has some G code on it, but you want to make sure the SD card that you're going to use to flash your firmware is formatted FAT32. So I'm just going to right click, format, make sure it's FAT32, and hit start. The format is complete. Now all you need is your new firmware bin file and your icons. So let's go back to File Explorer. We'll go back to Downloads, into our Big Tree Tech folder. And your firmware bin file, the one we just compiled, is going to be in PIO, build. We'll head into the TFT70, and this is the bin file right here that you need to flash your firmware on your screen. So we'll copy that, put it on our SD card. We'll head back to Downloads one more time and get our icons, Big Tree Tech. We'll go into this unified menu material theme, and we're going to copy this TFT70, the whole folder, and paste that on our SD card. And now when we load the SD card on the screen and we reboot, it'll pull in the new firmware. But before we do that, you can also edit any of the icons that you'd like. If you go into this TFT70, and we'll just go into BMP, any one of those icons that you'd like to change up, let's just say this Big Tree Tech boot screen, you can edit that in whatever editor you'd like, just don't change the file name. So you could put your logo here, and then every time it boots, that'll come up instead of the Big Tree Tech icon. But do remember, it has to be in this structure because that's what the firmware knows about, so just don't change the file name, and you should be fine. So let's go ahead and unmount our SD card. We'll load it on the screen, and then we'll power off, and we'll power on. You can see it's already started to update because it found the bin file. Now it's going to update all the fonts and the images that it uses for the buttons. When the update is complete, it's going to ask you to do a calibration on the touchscreen. You just need to go around and hit all the little red dots, and the update is complete. Let's go back to Menu, back to Settings, and Info. And you'll see we updated on August 26th, that's today, and we have a lot more info available. It knows it's the TFT70 now, we're using the Ender 3, and we have Marlin 206 installed. So there we go. And just so I can show you the difference today as when we looked at this before, a couple of months ago, if you head into Features, you can get a list of all the things that you can enable on this screen. A lot of this is the same stuff that we saw when we were looking at VS Code. So definitely check in here before you have to go reflash. It might be here. In Machine, you can do things like update your EEPROM. You can adjust some RGB lights if you have them. If you go into Tuning, you can do your PID. You can tune steps. And while we're in here, one of the biggest features that I think is going to be useful on this screen is this terminal feature. On the smaller screens, this feature is actually really hard to use. So the larger screen definitely makes it more user-friendly. We can do a G, 28, send, and the printer homes. And you know me, I'm a sucker for a terminal. Just touch anywhere to get out. This size screen definitely makes this thing a lot more handy. A lot of people are going to say, if you use this big screen, you just made the buttons bigger than on the smaller screen. And that is true. They should make different firmware options where you can add more to a larger screen. But just because this screen is bigger, this is much more useful in my opinion. We'll head back This is again the menu screen. We've got emergency stop. We've got all your custom settings. So disable steppers, initialize SD card, save to EEPROM. All that stuff is available in here. And let's head into movement, and let's go into leveling. We have manual leveling at the moment, so you can use that in here. We just have mesh grid set up, but if we had ABL enabled, there would also be those menus available. And you have baby stepping. This is a feature that other screens didn't have that you absolutely need, in my opinion, to get your first layer just right. So now it's here, you can use it if you want it. And one other thing in settings that might be handy, you should always check if you're having issues, come down to connection, and make sure your baud rate is correct. Remember, they have to match the board. In print now, you have the option to use the TFT SD card, the UDisc option, the USB drive, or the onboard SD card. Just remember, if you're going for the onboard G-codes, a lot of the features like filament runout on the screen aren't going to work. Vice versa, some of the features you have on the board might not work if you're printing from this screen TFT. You can adjust fan speed on the fly here on front, bed, hot end, speed. And one more time, let's head into menu. Then we'll go into settings. And if you take a look at machine and then parameter settings, this is where you can set a lot of the specific stuff that might not be on every screen. Things like driver current, TMC bump sensitivity, even linear advanced and ABL settings. So a lot of the features that you might set in firmware are available right here on the touchscreen. Let's jump back and we'll go to features real quick. My rotary knob is green, and you can kind of see that here. My case is blocking it, but maybe we'll have to redesign this a bit so that we can see my cool green knob. Marlin mode in full screen, you saw that in the config. You can do that right here. I'm just impressed with all the stuff you can control now. And if you have a BL Touch enabled, auto bed leveling, you can even do all the test movements, the deploy and retract right from here. And let's once again check out Marlin mode. We'll just select it on the screen. We have our updated message, Marlin is awesome. It is updated with our new green color. And you'll have all the same menus that you would have on any other printer running Marlin with these options. So that's how you alter the TFT firmware, but what about the Marlin side of things to get this to work with your printer? Well, there's only a couple of settings you need to be worried about. For something like a 32-bit board, an SKR Mini, or a 1.3 or 1.4 board, the serial settings are pretty important. You have to have a serial port defined so you can use your USB, and one defined so you can use that TFT screen. On a mini board, the one like I have installed, I suggest you use serial port 2 for the first serial port, and then -1 for serial port 2. That will make sure that you can use the serial port, the USB port, for something like Octoprint or Prontoface, and then the first serial port set to 2 will allow you to use your screen successfully. Also, make sure that your baud rate, again, matches the screen and in the firmware. We're set to 115200 here. We are set to 115200 on the screen. And as for your LCD settings, if you scroll almost all the way down to the bottom, if you're using that Creality style, the one with that EXP3 connection, like I showed you here on the Mini, you'll want to define CR10 stock display. Now for a 1.3 or 1.4 SKR, let's scroll back up to the top. For the first serial port, you'll want to set that to 0 so you can use your serial for your TFT pins. And then again, serial port 2 will stay -1. That should be the correct setting for the serial ports, but if you're having issues, try to flip these around. Maybe that will work for you. Make the first one -1 and the second one 0. But it should work either way. Again, match the baud rate. Make sure you check that setting. And then for your LCD, you're going to want to use one that supports the EXP1 and 2 connections, like a lot of the older screens do. So either grab something like the RipRap Discount Smart Controller, that's the old 2004, or the RipRap Discount Full Graphics Smart Controller, 128 by 64. These LCD settings apply to that RAMs configuration as well. The only thing that's going to be different is the serial setting. For the old RAMs boards, the old 8-bit chips, all you need to do is leave serial port, the first one, to 0. And I just go ahead and comment out that second one. You don't need it. That serial should be available all the time on those boards, and it should just work. After you make these changes and re-flash, you should be all set using Marlin mode and touchscreen mode. So before in the video, I had some shots where I hadn't edited this bezel yet. I just wanted to show you it after, because now you can see the knob lights up nice and green, and you can still use your reset switch protector, which I really like that feature, so I wanted to keep it. So there's a look at the Big Tree Tech 7-inch TFT touchscreen, how to update the firmware, and how to customize it. And now that that firmware is open source, I'm sure there's a lot of community members out there that will be adding features to it all the time. Even if you have one of the older screens, or a smaller one, it doesn't have to be the 7-inch, go back and take a look at updating the firmware. All these features definitely make it a lot more handy to use. And as for the 7-inch screen, it is around $55 US from Aliexpress. You might not need one this big, but if you need the terminal at your printer, like I showed you, it is definitely easier to type on this one than it is the smaller screens. And I have an idea to put it on an enclosure, so I can see what's happening from far away across the room all the time. I don't have to walk up and monitor it or open up Octoprint. So definitely check it out if you think you might have a use case or you just want a really cool screen. Hopefully you liked this video and you found it helpful. That's it for today, and I will see you on the next one.